We've looked over the last few weeks, 4 or 5 weeks, however long it's been. We've seen that we do have a problem in Western church. We do have a problem in the UK, and that is the church is shrinking. We are the only denomination in the UK which is ultimately not growing. Not only that, but it is superbly declining, and lots of people will kind of cover that and paper over the cracks, but really it's just that we're not just making disciples and we're not really influencing our world. We looked at this idea of path dependence, this principle that actually we continue to do the things we've always done them just because that's why we've always done them is paramount to the fact that we don't like change. We looked at the QWERTY keyboard designed in 1874 in part by those who designed it were those who did Morse code, transcribed and translated it. So you can see that we're kind of outdated in various things, and nothing for me is more outdated than how our church methodology works in practice. We saw last week in particular that through David and Moses they were obsessed with this idea of building a dwelling place for God, and yet we actually are one. Now, that's got to change how we approach our world and our stuff. We also saw that we need to be present-centered, this idea that actually we can't continue to follow the Christian crowd in how it's done things, and actually we need to follow God's cloud. We need to follow the presence. And if there is a new way with a new day, we can't continue to do the old things as if it's the old day. We need to move into the new. We need to understand the fresh expression of Ecclesia and his church. So we are leaving the church that we've inherited to become the church that Jesus intended. But I want to take that a step further today. I want to impart something and bring an idea across which actually is probably going to help us step into God a little bit more. And this is very important that you don't hear what I'm not saying. But what if there was more? What if there was a genuine practical thing that I could tell you about today that you already kind of know about but maybe haven't paid much attention to because people don't tend to, that actually could increase the presence of God in your life, that actually could help you in your world, that actually if we implemented cultivating this particular area of our life as a community, I believe that we would see greater miracles, greater influence, greater healings, etc. Now that would sound like a dream, wouldn't it? Okay, you would all go, that sounds fantastic. I don't care what it is, I'm in. And yet what I'm not talking about is kind of a gnostic issue where we've got some secret no one else does. No, I hate that stuff. We're better than anybody else. No, it's a scriptural principle that actually has been bothering me for some considerable time. Because God's grace is free. We cannot earn it. And so when we look at something that says, we want to increase in God's presence, I always get a little bit wary. I get a little bit, is that going to be based on our behavior when it really should be about the Savior? But in this instance, in this case, I've been looking at this for a while. I've been trying to observe this, or you probably won't have noticed when I tell you what it is and we unpack it in particular. But there's something about it that I've noticed leads to greater influence, greater love, and greater desire to do God's mission, but also an ability that sees the supernatural expression of God increase in our life. So I'm going to get to it. I've just titled this, I think, Increasing Presence. And I want to read a couple of scriptures. Luke 2:52. Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. Interesting. And yet if Jesus was fully God and fully man and he increased in something, then so can we. Bizarre. Proverbs 3:4, then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man. So this is already pretty fascinating here. This is potentially pretty cool. There's something that says, although grace is free and it's unmerited and we can't earn it, we can grow in favor. So you can grow in God's favor in your life. And if we look at what favor ultimately is, it's this principle, it's this wonderful sentiment of humility. That humility and favor is the manifest expression of God's goodness in your life. So what if I unpack this kind of strange concept and we adopted it? What if we adopted this methodology that actually is humility? Because we read here in James 4:6, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Interesting. Not just talking about salvation. A quick scan and a little study will come to that conclusion, but you go deeper, it's more than that. Proverbs 3:34, the Lord resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. So this is where it takes it from. We also see this in 1 Peter 5:5, this same principle, this same idea that Scripture talks about not once, not twice, but 3 times a lady. Okay, it's this idea that he's trying to get across something that actually, okay, grace is free, but favors something slightly different. That the favor of God increases in your life if you work on your humility. Who wants to be more humble? It might not be what you think it is. So we could look at this and we could say, okay, let's understand the purpose of humility, and we'll do that. Let's look at what it is. But let's actually look at, okay, if this increases favor in our world, then I want to grow in humility because I want favor. But it's not about getting the stuff. I think there's a lot of people, when we look at the supernatural, it's actually about, well, we want the miracles and we want the power of God, but it's always got to be relational. It's always got to be the fact that actually we want the presence of God, we want his love, and we want to love him. And it just so happens the byproduct of that love is actually the miracles and the stuff and the good stuff. But it's based in a loving relationship. If you go after the stuff, you're missing the point. The point is always him. The point is always that relational connection to him. So everything that then comes from that. So if I was to ask you, okay, well, what is God's favor? How do we kind of make that work? What does that look like? Or even better, how do we get that? Well, some of you would probably say, well, we need to read our Bible. That's okay. Maybe we need to do it 30 minutes every day before we have breakfast. Maybe we need to soak in prayer and pray for 30 minutes a day. Maybe we need to do nicer stuff for people. And those things are all good, and fasting's good, but the whole point of those things is the presence. And so it's not actually about that. It's about cultivating humility. I think that's really weird. That's not something I would have initially gone to a few years ago. Let's start by looking at the opposite. You know what the opposite of humility is, don't you? Pride. You know that really well, because none of you suffer with it. You're wonderful people. I could talk about the Western Church and pride now, but I don't think I need to. I've harped on about that quite a lot. What is pride? Pride, I think, starts off with this insecurity. Every time I experience pride in my life, every time I experience someone else being prideful in theirs, actually, big part of that is insecurity. Now, some of you think, well, insecurity would be about humility. No. More often than not, it leads to an outburst of pride because people are so insecure they have to pull other people down to feel themselves better about themselves. So you don't acknowledge someone else's success because it makes you feel inferior. It's that kind of thinking. So insecurity is an unworthiness. It means that there's this gap in our world that if not filled, we feel so naff about ourselves that we project either a false image ultimately of who we are, but an inferior one or a superior one. So we either puff ourselves up or we pull ourselves down. And it comes from this idea of pride, this unworthiness. Another thing, and I've tried to keep with eyes, don't know if it'll help or not, but this idea of being inner directed, this idea of being self-absorbent. You see, when we're proud, we're self-absorbed. We are the center of our story when it should be that God is the center of our story. This idea of self-absorption that actually we make everything and everyone around us meet our criteria and do what we want them to do. And we try and control and manipulate everything around us to do that and to reach those. Our means to an end, if you like. The last thing I think when it comes to pride is it's actually quite an insular thing. Actually, we're quite closed-minded. We're not in a place where we're able to receive from other people. We're not in a place where actually we can unlearn and learn and grow and develop. We're in a position where, well, we know the situation and we know why that person's done that. And we kind of put ourselves in the sense of making the calls, if you like, rather than humbling ourselves. And so I thought, and I was looking at this idea of humility, and I was looking at it in the time of Jesus, and what fascinated me is that humility was looked down upon in the ancient world. It was not something, it wasn't a good look, actually. It was very much, if you had humility in your life, it was a pathetic weakness. It was this idea that actually if you were humble, well, that was really for the born to be ruled, not the born to rule group. It was the people of lowest society were the people who were humble. And so Jesus comes and he starts talking about, and as he does, he flips a known content upside down and basically says, no, I need you to be humble. At which point everyone's like, that's not good. Like the least shall be first. It's like, that doesn't make sense. This isn't our world. We're in a world where, you have to have social status and you have to build massive statues that are bigger than the last guy who was in charge because it's about how fantastic and autocratic we are. But no, it's not about that at all. So humility, what is it? Well, you could argue it's pretty much the opposite, but there's some small differences. For me, it's security. It's understanding that you are being made whole. It's wholeness in yourself. You feel like, there's a wholeness, there's a roundedness to who you are. We'll unpack that in a bit. But it's being sure of yourself, but not in an arrogant way. Sure of yourself. I think the next thing that brings about, and we're going to go into some detail on this, is we're talking about empathy. We're empathizing with other people's situations. We're talking about kindness. We're talking about this ability, I suppose, to understand the feelings and meet the needs, within reason, of other people. It's empathy. And then lastly, teachability. I have harped on about this so much because unless we are teachable in this church, we should just give up. The greatest asset to the church right now is a church and a group of people and a leadership and denominations. If they are teachable, the world is full of opportunity right now. I just don't think we are open to other people's opinions or views. We don't want to discuss it because we think we've got the answers, even though we're just regurgitating what someone else said. Are you with me so far? I don't think this is like world changing at this time. Hopefully you're okay. So that's the essence of the question is, well, how do we cultivate this? How do we grow in these areas? You might think, might be sat there thinking, I don't really want to. I'm all right. I'm pretty humble. Oh, this is going to be good. It's going to be good fun looking at your faces. But I think there's three core attributes that I think if we focused on growing in these things, that actually, bear in mind what I'm telling you is, yes, they're good for you. They're good for other people. They're good for God. But ultimately, you're going to see more favor through you and in you. So that's why we want to look at this. First up is grow in your identity. It's to know yourself. Insecure people act up or act down, depending on the situation, depending on the trauma of life and the demonic and people that have impacted them growing up, depending on what scale. I've found it almost impossible if someone is proud to bring them back to some kind of equilibrium. And on the same aspect, I've found it if someone is really insecure and low in self-esteem, it's really hard to teach them out of it. There's only one thing that I've seen that truly, truly works, and I suppose you could say counseling works a bit and undoing some of the trauma, but there's only one thing, and that is them understanding that they are a son and daughter of God and they receive the unconditional love of God. That they know there's nothing they can do to make God love them anymore, and there's nothing they can do to make God love them any less. And if they can get to that place of identity as a son and a daughter of the Father, then actually what we see is them being less insecure. Because their security then no longer comes from people around them who will fail them and who will judge them, but it comes from a Father who is passionately in love with them. By them I'm talking about you, right? Okay, just checking. See, for me, insecurity is about self-preservation. I know because I've got the t-shirt. We all experience this. There's this idea that either we act up or we act down, and it's just an awkward state of being. So for me, it's about learning to belong. It's a belonging. It's knowing where you belong, that you are seated at the right hand of the Father, that you are his home and he is your home and you belong in him. And if you can center yourself in that particular environment and that mentality, then you're going to grow in humility. And for me, there's three things. You need to be secure in God. Romans 8:15, for you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you've received the spirit of adoption as sons by whom we cry, Abba, Father, Papa. I just love this. I think the more we're able to receive his love, the more whole we can actually become. I don't know if you've noticed this, but it's really interesting to me that the more humble we are, the less we feel we need to prove ourselves. I always find that people's reaction to me, and then therefore how I react to them, tells me how I'm doing on the pride scale. Because it's just like, did that hurt? Did that impact me? Am I really going to place the value of their word when they don't really understand my context above what God is doing and saying and what I know about myself? It's hard, isn't it? But it's still a reality that we need to understand. If we're secure in him, we do not need to prove ourselves to anybody else. There's this idea that trauma has happened to every single one of us. We have issues that make us proud, or we would say humble is a shrinking down aspect. It's not that at all, actually. It's to know yourself. It's to know your worth. But I was looking at this, I was actually thinking, you know what, the one thing that God keeps trying to do in people's lives, and why we do ministry at all, is that he's trying to bring you back to become the person that he originally designed you to be, without the trauma. So the more you receive his love, the more wholeness you receive from him. And I think that's absolutely critical. We don't try and be someone we're not when we're growing in our identity in God. And our success isn't determined by what we do, it's determined by whose we are. It's not, our success isn't determined by what we do, it's determined by whose we are. His. And I think once we've understood that, or kind of got our heads around being sons and daughters a little bit, then we need to be leading us into secure in self, this idea that you can comfortably and authentically be you. Not rude, not aggressive, just this idea that actually I like who I am, that I fall in love with who I am because I'm becoming more and more like who God designed me to be. So there's hundreds of things I love about myself now that I didn't when I was 18 or 25 or 35 or 40. Carry on. But there's still things that I'm not excited about in my life. That I'm like, oh, I wish that would change. I wish I thought differently about this, or I need to work on this aspect. But actually, the more secure you are in God, the more secure you are in self. And what's fascinating is that when you know your strengths and your weaknesses and you're secure, you don't care who else knows. So it's quite easy now if you're in a team environment and you're secure, to say, you know what, I haven't got a clue about that. That's not my gifting. And that increases your influence, it doesn't diminish it. We'll talk about that whole understanding shortly. I've written here, it's about knowing yourself so much that when someone says something contrary, you know they're revealing their insecurity, not yours. I've seen that so often, that when someone has a pop at me for whatever reason, or has a go at someone or something we're involved with, I'm like, well, that doesn't say an awful lot about us, but it reveals a heck of a lot of where you are. And now my heart goes out to them because I understand the content is they're insecure. Most of the time. Sometimes it's demonic and they need a slap and deliverance. But most of the time, it's that sense of, okay, my heart breaks because I can see your insecurity, because I recognize it. Because I've also got that attribute, the potential to do that. And then I think once we've done that, and this is crucial, by the way, I don't know if you know, but other people are important. That's why you exist, by the way. So we need to be secure in others. We're here to do life with people, and we can't do that if we're constantly trying to compete and compare ourselves with other people rather than champion them. If we're here to champion other people but we're insecure in ourselves, we're going to keep competing and we're going to keep comparing. And if we keep competing and keep comparing, we're not going to bring the kingdom into their life, because we don't want them to succeed. And I think there's that element of jealousy, there's that element of pride, and it's this principle that we're trying to focus on here today, which is to grow in humility. But if we haven't got that place of security, we can't rejoice with other people. Romans 12:15, rejoice with those who rejoice. We think, yeah, we can do that until they get the promotion that you wanted. Until they get the car that you thought, oh, I really wanted a new car. Why have they got one and I haven't? It's that whole thing. Other people's successes when we feel insecure make us feel inferior. And so that's why growing in identity ultimately is important. Because to reach a broken world, we need to be secure in their success. We need to be the ones that are okay being not a number one, but a number two, who constantly builds up other people around us. So I may be technically a number one here and senior leader, but I always see my job as under everyone else, because if you're successful, then I've done my job. If you're equipped and empowered, I've done my job. If I haven't, and it's like, oh, Mike did a good job, but I don't feel equipped. It's a nice talk. Well, what was the point? So we exist, all of us, for other people to be growing. So that's growing your identity, belonging. The next one that we think we know and we think we do well as a church, but I would say maybe not so much, is serving and growing in God's mandate. I think actually a lot of the service that people do in the church, particularly in the UK, we would say that we're good servers. We would say that we put on good things, but I would argue I'm not convinced. I think actually we're so proud and we're so lacking humility that actually a lot of the service that we do is for us, not for God. It's to make us feel better. It's to make us feel like we're doing a good job for God, when actually the reality is we're already getting our reward. Because when we feel like, it's okay to know you've done a good job and feel satisfied with what you've done, but if your motive is trying to reward yourself, if your motive is actually, well, I need to feel valued here, I need to feel important here, so I'm going to go and pastor loads of people, or we're going to go and be a philanthropist, and we're going to go and pour a load of money that we got given into a project, so we feel like we're doing some good. I don't know if you'll understand where I'm coming from there, but you can see you can do good with bad motives, and it's not good. Even though you're bringing good, it's not technically bringing the kingdom. Maybe that's a bigger thought than when I'm talking about humility. Let's stop moving on. So where identity was knowing yourself, for me, this is dying to self, which is arguably one of the hardest things to do. Romans 6:11, count yourself dead to sin but alive to God in Christ Jesus. It's putting God's mandate before your own interests. It's recentering and reorganizing your life, which is really hard when you first decide to follow Jesus. It takes some time for him to kind of reorder, but you're giving up the right of your own life to serve his purposes. Now, it's not that he doesn't want you to be successful, that he doesn't want you to be happy. He just knows that when you do what he's called you to do and designed you to do and designed you to be, then you'll be happier. But we're all happier when we're doing the will of God and achieving his purposes. It's about putting others' needs within reason before your own. So it's not that God doesn't want you to have nice things. It's just that you exist, your primary purpose is now other-focused. And if you haven't got a sense of strong identity, it's going to be really hard to see other people prosper when you're jealous of them and it makes you feel not enough. If we're so self-absorbed, we won't heed things like Psalm 90:17. Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us and establish the work of our hands upon us. Proverbs 3:27. Is it there? Probably not. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it's your power to act. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it's in your power to act. Gosh, we could spend a long time on that, but we won't. So for me, this is cultivating three different things. And I want to read Psalm 90:17. I, therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you, it's not, it's Ephesians 4, I thought that's not there, calling to which you have been called with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing one another with one another in love. Humility, gentleness, love, patience is other people focused. And for me, those three things that kind of sum up this aspect of serving and this aspect of humility is, well, it's empathy, it's honor and gratitude. And the one I want to expand on here is honor. why? I don't know why we struggle with honor. Like, you can disagree with someone, but you can still honor them. I mean, I struggle with this with church because I get in this conflict where I want to be real about church because I absolutely love it, but I'm also a realist. So when someone else isn't a realist, I get too real, I suppose, and I'm trying to get this balance. But when it comes to individual people, there isn't one person that I've ever met that God doesn't adore. There isn't one person that is going to get a prophetic word that I've met that is going to be bad or demoralizing or awkward. It's always going to be based in God's love. And honor is one of the weirdest things, because as soon as we start doing it, it's so countercultural to what other people do that it makes everyone in the room feel uncomfortable unless you're used to it. You start honoring people in the workplace, in the school, maybe in your friendship circles, and just uplifting them and encouraging them. It is absolutely phenomenal what happens, not just internally in them, but externally, environmentally, around you. It's absolutely remarkable. So, I don't want to go into, well, I can't say that because it's too close time. So, one of the things is honor, and it's just got to come and it's got to flow easily. I can pick anyone in this room. Joel, I just love this guy's, I call it, that I keep telling him he's so measured. Like, it sounds like this weakness, but it's such a strength to not easily get flustered. I mean, I spent several months trying to fluster this guy before I did, didn't I? And I nearly got there a couple of times because I wanted to see a reaction in him. But the beauty of who he is and what God has done in him and through him is that, what are you, 25 now? 24, still only a baby at 24 years old. He is so measured and calm and able to process things, and he's humble enough that he'll ask questions. I love that about you. I rarely see it in someone of that age. I think it's remarkable. Ethan, I can pick you out now, and I can say what I love about you is the fact that you just love asking questions. I mean, I spent probably an hour but I love it. I love answering questions because you don't want to just know something for the sake of it. You want to know truth. You want what God has for you, whatever that is. And he could pull up your entire belief system and you'll be fine with it because you just want him, ultimately. That's a beautiful thing. And if you're at Bible college, that's a rare trait. You will not find necessarily common souls because people tend to go to Bible college to kind of puff up what they already know, not necessarily to have their mind blown, which is why so many people lose their faith, because Scripture is a very complex thing and situation. But what I love about it, you've got that center and presence in your life, and I want to honor that on you. You see, if we start doing that, it's so countercultural. You start doing it with a boss. Now, don't love bomb them. It's weird. But just start off with a little compliment. Encourage people. One of the things I love about our church here is that people are so nice. They're so friendly. Well, most people. Most people are so friendly and they're courteous and they're understanding and they're patient and graceful. But I would love it if we were continuously honoring. If we constantly... You get pulled down all the time. You get pulled down largely by lying spirits and your own internal mental well-being that tells you you're nothing, you're not good enough, you're rubbish, you shouldn't have done that, how dreadful you are, and how terrible life is. Okay, so you don't need someone to come and say anything about that at all. You don't need me to be prophetic to know everybody in this room struggles more often than not with negative thoughts. We live in the UK. I'm afraid it's kind of this spiritual oppression we need to kind of work with the Father to break off our nation. But when someone tells you how awesome you are, and they mean it, your soul shifts. Something goes off. You're like, wow, that's really helpful and really powerful. So Romans 12:10 says this: love one another with brotherly affection, outdo one another in showing honor. I love that. I love that idea of actually competing to be humble, competing to give other people honor. No, well, actually, Ethan and Joe, I've got something to say to you as well. No, it's not about that. It's about this idea of actually in the world, the one thing people need is lifting up, not pulling down. And we can only do that if we're humble. We can only do that if we're secure in who we are and we know how brilliant God has made us. So therefore, we can tell everybody else how brilliant. I really hope the crash is working still. Hello in the crash. Think about it. Anyone can be nice to somebody. Anyone can honor somebody in a controlling and manipulative way if we feel like we're going to get something out of it. I don't know how many times you've had a compliment or someone's played you and they've said something nice to you to get something from you. But what if that was genuine? It costs to honor someone. You have to lower yourself down in a position of humility to lift somebody else up. It's really hard to do, but it changes things. Ephesians 4:29 says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." So I was looking at this, I was looking around Ephesians 4, feel free to, it talks a lot about favor and honor, and that's the context. I was looking at this word unwholesome talk. I was like, because some of my mentors get really annoyed that I'm sarcastic. And right, they think it's a spiritual kind of depravity, and I'm like, you just don't understand the UK and banter. But sometimes I think maybe you're right. I'm teachable enough, I hope, to accept this. So I thought, I saw that. I thought, well, what's that? That's sarcasm. Am I in trouble here? Do I need to think this through? And I looked at this, and I love what it's talking about. Essentially, when it talks about unwholesome talk, it means not fit for God's purpose. So it's this idea of where we can bless someone or we can curse someone. It's being not fit for God's purpose and what we're called to do. So your idea, again, is honor. Your idea here is you're pouring life and comfort and strength and encouragement into other people. I think that's a beautiful principle to follow. When we die to self, we can live for others. When we die to self, we can live for others. And I think that's why humility attracts God's favor. These are kingdom principles that bring the king into that world. As soon as we start using kingdom principles, the presence of God starts to grow. So lastly and finally, we've had belonging, we've had serving, and now we're talking about connecting, just briefly. We're talking about growing ourselves. We're talking about growing in our learning. Proverbs 3, "My son, do not forget my teaching. Let love and faithfulness never leave you." Listen to this. "Then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man." Interesting things. There's this idea that actually if we position ourselves to learn, to unlearn and relearn and be humble, then actually there's a favor that's going to come from it. Ephesians 4:18 and Proverbs 3, several verses in that. "They are darkened in their understanding, alienated," so away from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to their hardness of heart, their unwillingness to learn, their unwillingness to be open. "Lean not on your own understanding. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Blessed," favor insinuated again here, "blessed are those who find wisdom." How do you find wisdom? By humbling yourselves, by being teachable, by being open to new concepts and new ideas. So we can see here that intentionally growing in wisdom creates blessing. And when we do that and when we're learning, we actually have something to offer people who are struggling. We have strength that we can draw from God because we're secure in Him. We have strength because we're learning continuously to be able to give strength to other people when they need it. We can lend our strength. We can get new solutions to existing problems in people's lives because we're constantly putting ourselves in a position where we're learning. So I recommend you read Scripture, and I recommend you read books and you grow and you learn and you wait on God because wisdom just starts happening. And in a Western Christianity, in a UK Christianity that's path-dependent, that's stubborn as heck, with a little hint of arrogance right now, it's more imperative than ever that we adopt a position of unlearning and relearning. So there's three things connected to that. It's exposure to different ideas than where you currently are. If I feel something strongly about something like the God is good concept, right? It's not a popular concept because people want to pick holes in it all the time. I've read everything that I know how to read on the opposite of that. because I want to know truth. If this isn't legit, I don't want to waste my time preaching it, or the disrespect of this in certain theology if this isn't accurate. So we have to expose ourselves to various different avenues of thought. We also need to question everything. So when you hear a preach by me, don't just go, "Oh, that's Mike, I trust him." If something sparks an interest, please unpack it yourself and see how amazingly I taught that subject. I'm just checking if anyone's still awake. We're nearly done. Being vulnerable is hard. We don't want people to truly know who we are, but one of the key ways that I think we can be vulnerable is just accepting the fact that we don't know. It's really annoying when you do that and other people in the room who don't know what they're talking about pretend to know what they're talking about. Now that's okay. That's them and not you. You can do you. You can't do them. I'm going to miss all that stuff out. I think this is why humility works, because none of the stuff I've just spoken about you would class as super spiritual, would you? So if we think about this, if you are strong in your identity and who God is, then actually what's going to start taking place is you are going to be able to be utilized by him more. You are going to grow in favor with him because you're not questioning him all the time. You're not questioning yourself. You're not doubting. You're not putting baby in the corner. Okay, you're willing to step out a little bit now and say, okay, now I'm secure in who God is and what he wants me to do. Whatever that looks like, I'm in. You're not like, well, I'm not enough. I'm not sure. I'm not convinced. I don't think this is going to work. Why would God ask that of me? I'm nothing. You're not in a position of false humility. You're in a position, no, I'm secure in who I am. And once you're secure in who you are, because that's a natural thing to be like, right? This is just a natural fruit of being secure. Then actually you're okay helping other people because it's not about you. It's about them. And so you can give your service and you can give your life to other people, not because you want to get something out of it, not because you're trying to earn God's favor, just because you're so secure in God and you're so humble that actually it attracts favor from other people. So of course you're useful to him. Of course you're going to start to see more. Of course, actually, if you humble yourself, there's an attractive element to that. Because no longer are you a threat. They're not competing or comparing themselves with you because you're not doing that to them. You're different. You're exhibiting a different spirit. And so suddenly you are able to be used of God in a favorable way. So yes, there's a supernatural element to this, but actually it's quite a natural progression of thought. And the more open you are to new ideas, the less confrontational you are. Actually, because you're mutually learning and growing. There isn't anybody you've ever met that can't teach you something. You might get it with some people after 5 minutes you've heard everything they've got to say. And there's nothing else you can know. But everybody, I would say everybody, so any sermon, no matter how terrible it is, right, I will be able to get something from it. Worship, no matter how terrible I might feel a worship service is, I will still get something from it. I may not enjoy it, but I will receive from the Father because everybody has got something that I can learn from. Why? Because honor matters. If you dishonor, it's a bit like Jesus, when Jesus is in the town and they say he couldn't do any miracles there. Well, it wasn't because he couldn't do miracles. It's because they saw him as this kid that they probably changed his cloth nappy and they thought, well, this guy can't heal anybody. And so he doesn't because they didn't ask him. It's a matter of dishonor and honor. The more honorable you are, the more we'll receive from each other. And that's an issue, by the way, when we're in this church and we've known each other for so long and we know how annoying each other is, right? Is actually we might not go to that individual because, we've known them for ages. I don't know if they've ever got a prophetic word. I don't know if they've ever seen anyone healed. And so we don't. We still don't know the favor of God that's on every individual in this room. Just to give you an example, how are we for time actually? Oh, need to wrap up. I am nearly done. You'll be relieved to know. An example, so I've prayed for, oh my gosh, dozens and dozens and dozens of people who've got cancer. And I've only ever seen one genuinely healed person. I have prayed, so I would say, not had a breakthrough in favor in that area of my life. It's the one thing everybody probably wants favor of God on to break through in that area. And I believe it's coming. But I have prayed for 8 couples who couldn't have children. Right? Stumbled on this. Used to just keep getting asked. It's probably been a couple of years. And all 8 couples all have children. Right? It's weird. I can say fully enclosed here, I haven't had anything to do with that. Right? Right? Just to qualify that statement. But I do need to say this. I have full faith because I've seen it not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, not 5 times, not 6 times, not 7 times, but 8 times out of 8 that these people have kids. I was on 7 out of 8 for quite some time. I was praying for this couple and I thought, oh, okay, that's a bit weird, but you can't win them all. I really had faith for that. And then it was literally another several months later and they put a post on Facebook with their baby. I was like, what? This is 8 out of 8. This is nuts. So there's favor on your life for something. Okay, even if it's something weird and wacky. I have nothing to do with that. I never even prayed for that. It's just something that's happened. Okay, so there's pressure on me for the next time, right? It's not me. It's just God. There's a favor there. You have favor in so many areas in your life. Your job is that favor isn't just for you, it's for those around you. It's to give. Part of what's beautiful about being a church where everyone is going to get to play, well, hopefully everyone is getting to play even now, but growing forward, is that we honor one another, the gifts and the calling of God on each other. And actually, when we find the grace, so I was praying for someone's fingers last week because they're not in good shape. And I knew there's someone who's received in the last 3 years, their fingers were completely healed of many conditions. So I took her over and I went over to this person who'd had the healing and said, well, you've got favor on your life for this. Will you pray for it? Because it's just the favor of God. We don't know. And that's a miracle sense, but we're talking about this in business. We're talking about this in society and school and healing as well. So I think we're done there. We're done. Weekly Ponder. We're going to have a bit of worship. If worship team can come back up. I say worship team. Joel and Lucy, if they can get up, they're more than enough for a worship team. They're amazing. Where am I weakest in my humility? I'll put the chart back up afterwards at the end. Where am I weakest in my humility? And how could I practically increase humility in my life? How could I practically increase humility in my life? I promise you that this is a scriptural present you will find time and time again, that if you adopt that, belonging and serving and connecting in your life, you will start to grow in God giving you favor and seeing God's favor in life. It may not be, oh, well, if you pray this particular prayer, but it's how God has told us in Scripture we can move. Next week, Julie's going to start, our very own Dr. Julie Greenway is going to unpack another way we can attract the presence of God. But let's stand, let's pray, let's worship. You've got 15 minutes till you collect the kids. There's tea and coffee outside and some biscuits if you've been a good boy or girl. That's favor for you. And if anyone wants prayer, please just come to the back. We'd love to pray for you and stand with you.